Hey guys, and welcome to another OBSEC Battle Report. My name's Mike, and today we're checking out Game 1 of the West Australian Masters 40k event that was held in September 2016. It's a Grey Knight, Space Marine, and Space Wolf list against Space Marine Salamanders. We're playing Big Guns Never Tire. This is our new Starship interior table as well that was completed by myself and my wife in the lead up to the event. It was quite an interesting board to put together to try and make work for 40k, but I think we did a good job. Let's get straight into the game. Obviously, we've got Space Marine turn 1 here. The pod's landing. We've got a couple of Dreadnoughts moving up and encircling the Rhinos and Razorbacks of the Salamanders. Those 5 expendable Space Marines landing in the middle there and putting some pressure down. We've also got those Centurions there with the Librarian, of course, rolling on Divination. Tristan, who's playing the Space Marine allied combination there, very long time gamer in the local community for tournaments, and this list's been developed and developed and developed. The inclusion of the Death Pack's a new thing for Masters this year, and the run and charge that these Thundercav get is particularly brutal. If you haven't had to face it before, it can come as quite a surprise when the 5 or 6 Thunderwolves come barreling in with all their Strength 5, Strength 6, or even worse. When they start packing Thunderhammers and Power Fists like Tristan does. Strength 10, Rending, AP2, and then on top of that they've all got Storm Shields, 3 plus armor. They're quite difficult to put down, and if you don't put them down quickly then they can prove a real hassle. And of course Tristan's army at this point is a very early punch army, those 2 shunting Dreadnoughts with their multiple firepower in the form of the Heavy Incinerator and the Psy Cannon, I should say, put out a decent amount of firepower and put pressure on early with those shunt moves. And as you can see now at the top of the screen there, Mike having to essentially try and redeploy and shuffle about in the face of those Thundercav and the Dreadnought. There's no good choice there either. You just don't have the firepower to put them all down quickly enough in most cases. And then on the other flank, he's got another Dreadnought plus those Centurions. It's a very early pressure army is Tristan's, and unfortunately for Mike, it puts him on the back foot straight from the get-go, because obviously he's got aircraft in reserve that aren't here. He's got a good 500 points off the table to start the game, and obviously that means that Tristan can apply that pressure quite early and quite heavily. Tristan and Mike have also been quite interesting in the way they've deployed the objectives. You can see 2 of them right there at the bottom of the screen, a third where the Dreadnought used to be. Obviously through sustained firepower there it ceased to exist. And then there's a couple up the top there, I don't know if you can see them just behind the pipes at the top of the screen there. Now what's interesting in that decision is with the removal of that Dreadnought, obviously that lifts some of the pressure from that flank, but obviously it means now we're going to have a multi-charge from those Thundercav. Yeah, some of the Strike Knights deploying now. And then obviously that Dreadnought is going to come in and do some harm. So we're getting the Heavy Incinerator firing there. There goes the Land Speeder. Tristan being very careful to try and mop up whole units here where he possibly can, which is always a sensible strategy for any sort of game, but in these missions in particular where you're scoring Maelstrom and kill points, and on top of that you're scoring a Eternal War mission, it's very, very important to mop up units because they can still threaten you later in the game with scoring, particularly if, like the Salamanders do, where they pack a bunch of melter guns and those drop pods aren't exactly safe at close range. There goes another Rhino. A little bit of Overwatch here now before the Thundercav go in. We are going to get a multi-charge here into that other tank. And down the bottom, of course, you've got the Dreadnought and the Space Marines fighting Space Marines in the very bottom corner, tactical versus tactical. That'll just come down to who's luckier on the dice. Tristan being quite conservative with those Grey Knights at the top of the screen there. They've deployed quite far back, and that could be partly due to the aircraft still to come. It could also be him looking for those objectives at the top corner there, depending on what cards he's getting drawn there. Unsurprisingly, those Thundercav delete that unit and that vehicle. So here come the first of the aircraft, the Storm Raven, and there's a couple of Storm Talons as well. Now these put out a surprising amount of firepower if you haven't faced them en masse in a Storm, in this sort of formation. The Storm Talons in particular gain quite a lot of benefit from the formation. We're going to see here as the two of them peel on. And then again, we now start having the Storm Raven start deleting those Centurions. So we lost 2 in that exchange straight away, which was quite impressive. Obviously, taking a lot of hits and wounds there. Those Grey Knights now obviously moving back to an objective, and the Centurion and the Librarian repositioning slightly. Thundercab moving to engage, put some more pressure back on the infantry. It's interesting at this point with Mike's army, unfortunately the Salamanders, they got hit so hard and so quickly early in the piece that he's never really given a chance to get a breath and recover. Those Thundercab are in use so quickly, and the pressure those 2 Dread Knights put on early in the game means that unless you can deal with them rapidly, Tristan's army does put a lot of pressure on you early in the piece. So some snap firing bolters and stuff which will come out of the drop pods, and nothing particularly interesting. It's all opportunistic fire at this point. So we can go the Thundercav, which will obviously see that land speeder and all those infantry dead in just a moment. They do put out a huge amount of attacks. There's something like 30 attacks in that unit, all of which is either rending or AP2. It's quite brutal. And there goes the Dread Knight helping the last Marine down there finish off its adversary. We're going to go to hover mode now with that Storm Raven. Obviously feeling fairly safe with it. And here come the Talons as well coming in. Now the Talons have got a little bit more flexibility because obviously those chin-mounted turret weapons. Some disembarking out of the Raven as well. As you saw there, I don't know if you caught it very quickly there, but they went the Librarian into the Centurion. And they're now going to put a whole bunch of fire and hurt on those Thundercav. Obviously you can see if Michael had the aircraft earlier in the piece, particularly if he'd started with one of them on the table, perhaps with a Sky Shield, then the limit that he had to deal with, that 500 points down at the start of the game, wouldn't have been as painful. He would have been a couple 100 points down. You also had the firepower to put into those Centurions early in the piece in turn 1, as opposed to having to wait until turn 3 to finish them off. That being said, Tristan put a lot of pressure on early. He's got 2 drop pods and objectives at the moment. The third's heavily contested. There's 2 more that are at the top of the screen there. There's a Grey Knight squad that's run up there to take one of them. The other being just left in the open at the moment. So we've already lost 3 of the Thundercav. In goes the Dreadnought. Obviously the Storm Raven being an assault vehicle. Consolidating in. It's important to note at this stage as well, Mike at this stage has those 3 flyers and a handful of infantry, and that's about it. And even if it comes right down to the end of the game and Tristan's only got a couple of drop pods left, it's completely possible for him to win purely because he can control objectives very easily and has done for most of the game. And he's scoring Maelstrom cards reliably every turn. And that just puts a lot of pressure on Mike that those flyers just don't have the ability to maneuver fast enough and get around quickly enough to really engage those ground assets and reliably take them out. Drop pods are still armor 12 and 3 hull points, and a Storm Raven might have a crack at it when it's fully loaded, but with just those 2 primary weapons, it's probably a 50-50 shot. All it takes is a miss or an uneven hit, and all of a sudden you're having to shoot it a second time. Same with the Talons. The Talons are probably even less effective, all things considered. And see just there the Talon putting a hull point on that drop pod, and those Strike Knights really getting pounded by the Raven and the Talon. Clearing that objective, which is a very sensible decision. So the Thundercav down to a single model there fighting the Dreadnought. There's a couple of Grey Hunters in the middle of the board which are probably going to be vital because there's an objective just there where he's moved them now. To the left of the centre of the table there. shuffling about with the Dread Knight, trying to put some fire up at the Talon. At this point, Tristan has a fairly commanding table presence and board control, which, like I've said, is going to be hard for Michael to recover from. And that's kind of where the game wraps up. I mean, unfortunately for Michael, at this stage, he's out of assets. And despite the commanding air superiority at this stage, the position of those flies means they either have to go to hover mode or leave the table. And it's too late in the game now for him to really threaten the Dread Knight or the Space Wolves to stop them claiming the day just through controlling objectives. Obviously, this is Big Guns Never Tire, so there's 2 objectives that the drop pods are on straight away. And he's obviously been scoring Maelstrom cards since turn 1 as well. And that's game. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. There will be a couple more of the follow-up for the series. There's 6 in the series, so we'll hope to see you at the next one.